Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is John Sampogna, co-CEO and founding partner at Wondersauce, a digitally focused advertising agency. John has been Senior Manager of Client Services at Code and Theory and Account Manager Client Services at Schematic before founding Wondersauce more than 6 years ago. John and his team work with some of the world's leading brands, including Google, HBO, the Gap, and Anheuser-Busch InBev. Welcome here, John.
Hey, how are you?
I'm
Happy to
good.
be here.
Good stuff. So tell our listeners a little bit about Wondersauce, and I'm interested in why on earth you started an agency with so many agencies around already.
It's a really good question, and honestly, I ask myself that, and we discuss as business partners every day. But no, it's been fun, and it's been a good journey. But really, the story of Wondersauce is actually quite natural and very much what goes on at any company in the world when you're just kind of coming through the ranks and meeting friends and discussing how you would do things differently and opportunities and all that good stuff. But the genesis of Wondersauce is really just friends that all really loved what we do, which was and is creating things that live on the internet and understanding how humans interact with screens. And back in 2009, 2010, we started just naturally talking about, well, what would we build if we had our own agency, and what would we do differently? What do we think the opportunity is? And when we were crazy enough to actually quit our jobs during a recession and go for it, I guess looking back on it, it was pretty funny because we didn't really think twice about it, but it was fairly risky. You know, we had no investment and no big people backing us and really no clients. So we just kind of went for it. But the general idea for us was, let's create an agency that is leading with what we call infrastructure and then complemented by activation, which is, I think, the opposite of what most ad agencies have always approached things. So when I say infrastructure, our focus is building the foundational building blocks of brands online that historically has been overlooked for the last 15, 20 years as the internet has become obviously where it is today. So things like websites and apps, e-commerce, analytics and data, CRM, CMS building, really the non-sexy aspect of marketing. But more importantly, as the world becomes more and more connected, those moments where you're, buying something online, depositing a check into your bank, consuming content, those are the moments where, if done right, you're passively winning as a brand. And then ultimately, we wanted to complement that with the traditional services, which are, content creation, campaign development, social media strategies and implementations, and ultimately more of the marketing and advertising that has driven this industry for decades. And then ultimately, kind of complementing that with paid media, which is basically then taking all that activation and awareness that's out in the world and driving it to world-class infrastructure that's ultimately ready to accept it and convert. And that could be literal conversion like sales, or it could be driving someone into a restaurant or a hotel or event. But that to me is modern marketing and modern advertising. It's understanding holistically the complete customer journey and how to design across that in a way that makes sense with modern consumers.
So when you first started this some years back, when you were approaching brands and potential clients, did they get this, that they needed essentially this underground plumbing, if you will, to get done? Or did you have to basically teach them about it?
It was a little bit of both. I think that in the early days, when we were a handful of folks just kind of trying to do great work, and we're just really flattered by the clients that we were lucky enough to have. But I think it's a mix, and it is still a mix to this day, of brands that really get it and value it and understand that without the plumbing and the water and all that, your house is going to crumble. And then there's still people out there that don't really value and get it, but that's becoming more and more unlikely and uncommon. For us, it's just a mix of not trying to be too aspirational and too future thinking, and more around like, well, how can we just, rather than talk to them about it for the next 6 months, how can we just deploy something in less than 6 months that just speaks to the value and gets them some initial wins so they can get excited about it, and we can keep going down that path versus just like kind of navel gazing and talking about it, to exhaustion.
So once you do the infrastructure with a client, do you then move sort of more upstream?
It's all mixed. I mean, right now, Wondersauce is only, we're just over 100 folks, and we're not working with Fortune 100 brands on full advertising, marketing, websites, apps, analytics, home assistant stuff across the board. Most of the time, we're working with smaller brands on that end-to-end relationship where we are doing all of that stuff. But when we're working with larger brands, it's very much, and that's where things are going now. But a lot of brands, they want to have, not a ton of partners, but a handful of strategic partnerships that they can kind of tap into and handle their holistic approach towards marketing and advertising and whatnot. So for us, even if we're just doing one aspect, like let's say we're building an e-commerce experience or creating content, I think that even if we're just doing that small segment, as a partner now, to be able to responsibly deliver even just a small segment of a brand's marketing, you need to be holistically aware of how what you're delivering will impact everything else, whether that's physical retail, whether that's social or paid media, whether that's direct response. It could be anything, but you need to understand how the entire ecosystem now works together and be able to inform and bubble up risk, even if you're only delivering one aspect of that. And then, sure enough, when we do kind of speak holistically and deliver what we said we would deliver really well and on time and on budget, and people are happy about it, and then they hear our thoughts on other aspects of marketing and advertising that we're not working with them on, it kind of naturally bleeds into that relationship between. So more often than not, that's how our relationships extend and scale.
So some of your early focus was really on screens and multi-screen experiences, if I have this correctly. And then voice came along in a really big way. How did you make the transition, if you did?
We still are making the transition, as I think most of the industry is. I always equate voice to about 10 years ago when the App Store was having their ascension into dominance. And where I equate voice right now is to where I see app development for especially brands in the mid to late 2000s, where the first batch of applications coming out were like very, very literal things. It was like, here's your music and this is the weather. And it was just very much like the most literal and obvious examples of app development. And then you saw throughout the last 10 plus years, million and billion-dollar businesses built on top of the app ecosystem. And I think, like I always say, that voice, especially through the lens of a brand, is waiting for their Shazam moment, where I remember vividly when I first interacted with Shazam and just kind of like waved my phone in a crowded bar and it spit up whatever was on in the bar. You just saw intrinsically the value that connecting software to hardware in the capacity of mobile would offer brands for years to come. And I very much think that that's where we're at with voice, where it's still, how old is this actor? What's the weather? Play me the news briefing. Turn on the lights. It's those are all valuable things, but it's very much the first step of a very literal journey. And I'm still waiting, and we're still working towards prototyping on what is that moment where consumers and brands are going to be like, huh, that really showcases the power of a brand's voice and has added in a whole new layer across the customer journey that is inherently valuable. So we're still waiting, I think.
So what do you think that might look like?
I don't know. I think that, again, there's literal and non-literal ways of doing this. I'm a student of the game, and I'm constantly following what's going on. And I just saw this Jim Beam connected decanter over the weekend, which is pretty funny.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
It's interesting and it's cool. And I think, like, literally speaking, it's on brand, and it's a very cheeky product, right? It's not something that's going to revolutionize anything, but the fact that it's from a brand standpoint, it feels like you're speaking to the brand, and it's funny, and Uh, it's a very simple one feature connected device. And I don't think it's not revolutionary, but it's interesting. I also think that like when I say non-literal, I think right now a lot of brands are really scrambling to figure out what that quote unquote voice is going to be. Like, what is our tone? Is it a male? Is it a female? Is it both? Is it, I think that they're really trying to figure that out. And I'm questioning whether or not you actually need a brand to respond to you in a lot of these cases. I think that there's a lot of value in being able to speak to a home assistant or a connected device, and for that return from the brand to not be something spoken. I think that whether that's triggering something, whether that's ordering, or whether that's completing a utility or something of value, that voice has just made it that much easier. I don't think most customers want to have personalized and intimate conversations with CPG brands and restaurants in their home. While they're not against it, and there will be cool executions of it, I think again it's a very literal first step in activating voice towards a real value.
So where do you see the screens and voice together in the home in the future? Because we're looking at smart TVs now. We're talking to Alexa or Home. How do you see that kind of shaking out?
And it's going to be great. It's going to be super interesting. It already is. I'm such a in terms of like how I practically use things. It's very much like I use it in the most basic formats, whether it's heat and lights and music, and that to me is super valuable. I think there's a bit of a pain point right now with a lot of this stuff at scale, whether that be like appliances like refrigerators and microwaves, or even cars. And there seems to be a disconnect currently around, I guess what I consider the configuration stage of getting all my information in there, and also like the interface standpoint, where a lot of it is just generally painful to do. And I always kind of ask myself, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the 5 to 10 minutes I'm going to spend getting stuff set up, is it a novelty where I'll get a kick out of it for a week or two and show my friends when they come over? Or is it something that's going to be inherently baked into my habit? And that is where I think there's still a ton of opportunity. We have a ton of these connected devices being deployed weekly, and they're all ranging in terms of their complexity. Some are backed by massive companies like obviously Google and Amazon and Apple and Samsung and whatnot, and others are by small startups that are funded and non-funded, and they are ranging in terms of their complexity and also their security. Well, I think security is another big thing. And I just saw recently that Google released a sync feature, which is pretty interesting. Basically, it'll allow you to kind of go through your entire ecosystem of connected things and then just like quickly sync them, so you don't have to go into all of those bespoke interfaces and update it or fix things when it inherently breaks. So I think we're at kind of a point right now where the big players are starting to go for that land grab and taking a lot of those integrations, but we're still seeing kind of more unique, nuanced executions that are more on the individual product standpoint.
So do you think voice will sort of come together? I mean, now you've got Alexa versus Home versus Cortana versus who knows what's coming out next. Do you think that'll all merge together somehow?
Yeah, I mean, it has to. This is no different than how anything that reaches a certain scale. Think about the 90s with the different operating systems and how there were a bunch and then there were a few. Now there's only a couple. And I think this is just a natural part, and it's from my standpoint, it's where there's most opportunity to step in as a brand or a product company and make something that could really make an impact in a very early space.
Can you talk a bit about your concept of forgettable design?
Yeah, this is it's funny. I think as marketers and advertisers, we're always trying to be memorable, and I think while that's aspirational and it's a good thing to have in mind, I ultimately think that most of the time, if you are memorable, you can make the argument it's not very good. I think a lot of times when you're memorable, it's because you probably pissed off a customer and they're like, man, this brand is really bumming me out. This product's not great. Why is this happening like this? And I think that at Wondersauce, we really look at the idea of being memorable and also being forgettable. And I think sometimes when you're designing products, being forgettable is actually quite hard. And if done right, you're passively building up equity within the mind of a consumer that you can kind of cash in at a later date. So when I say being forgettable, I'm not saying, guys, just do the lowest common denominator and deliver marginal work. I'm saying, think about a solution, an idea, a product, and deliver it so it is so seamless and turnkey. It has provided a user with such a quick and baseline utility that they don't really have to think about it because it was easy. And I think being easy is ultimately what we strive to do at Wondersauce. So if I'm I'm on the road right now, and I'm on the road quite a bit, and if I have to extend my stay at a hotel or change my flight, I honestly don't want that to be a memorable experience. I want it to be something that happens very quickly, and I want it to move on with my life. If I'm reading a piece of content on the internet, I don't want to get bombarded with crazy, in-your-face design and the latest gimmick in terms of like how people are using these web technologies to, make the experience quote unquote, experiential or fun. I kind of want to just read something, and if there's a moment to dial it up, pick your spot, but pick it wisely. So I think the idea of forgettable design is not trying to overthink it. It's focusing on the baseline, getting it out in its most simplest manner, and then focusing on the area where there's actual complexity, and then innovating there versus trying to sprinkle innovation everywhere.
So is an example of that like a one-click purchase?
Sure. It's a one-click purchase. It's quickly being able to browse a massively skewed e-com website that has 20,000 products. It's being able to share something. It's being able to quickly connect with someone. It's being able to have the blend between physical and digital in terms of brands that rely a lot on physical interaction. It's about using digital to make that human interaction smarter and more informed, and not double work. Like I'm filling out all this information online, and then it somehow never gets to the point of sale in the CRM system, and then I'm having to do it again. Like that's wildly frustrating. Why don't ask at all if you're going to have to do it twice? So I think it's a matter of just connecting things in a seamless manner, and making that customer journey just pleasant.
So you're dealing a lot in human behavior, really. How do you find out what human behavior is going to be? Do you actually say, if we do this, they will probably like this? Or do you go test something? How do you find out what behavior would be?
I think it starts at the top. So I'll circle back. I mean, at the more tactical standpoint, we have a usability lab. We have user experience experts that research and study behavior and how people interact with things, and specifically also how different demographics interact with things. And ultimately, when we're building a product, we're testing, we are using research and data, we are doing surveys, and we are making sure that what we're building is going to at least be the majority of the way correct. You can't be 100% correct, but you can aim for at least 70 to 80% out the gate. But I think more importantly, before even getting into testing and validating, it's about what is it that, from a services standpoint, makes sense for your organization. So Wondersauce, I always say that while we focus on emerging technology, we're focusing on what I say is emerging technology at scale. So we're not first to market with making home assistant apps or VR and AR things, or building businesses on top of blockchain. While we are inherently very interested in that and researching it, our company has always been focused on utility and making customers' lives easier. So until those things are at scale, we don't necessarily mess with it. So what I'm doing constantly is working with our executive team and our creatives and figuring out where are those areas that are ready for scale. And I would say, about a year ago, we identified home assistants as something that, kind of took over the market faster than anyone really expected. And the fact that Google and Amazon are working so hard and have such a robust API set, it's something that we can kind of inform our brands on today and deliver solutions that will make customers happier today and 2018. And that to me is, emerging technology at scale. We have not yet really dabbled in virtual reality, because for me, it's very much still more on the experiential end. It's more about, you need a very controlled setting, and it needs to be tested and configured in a way where it doesn't break. And that to me is not what Wondersauce is focused on yet. When it becomes at the point where we can deploy it against thousands and thousands of users, and for it to have limited issues in terms of testing, that is when I'm very interested in it, but it's not quite there yet.
What about AR?
The same thing. It to me is it's not at a level where I think it could. While there are executions of it that are scaled or at scale, it's still not something that we're practicing today. That's something that I would imagine us doing in the near future. But for us, we focus on enterprise and working with companies at scale and being able to deliver something that we can confidently stand behind and say, this is going to be incredible and it's going to change your business and make you more money or get you more customers. And we need to make sure that the technology we're recommending is there. And we've had, I guess, mixed results in our experience thus far. That's not to say that there's no value in it. I think for certain businesses and for certain types of marketing, especially in the experiential space, I do think that there's value. But to me, it more often than not, it falls in the gimmicky phase still.
So do you have brands that are coming to you and say, hey, I'm really interested in VR and AR. Can you keep me posted, or can we do something, or do they do that, or do you bring things to them?
It's both. We're constantly delivering recommendations, both solicited and unsolicited, to our brands. And whenever we see an opportunity that's something that there's value, we'll we'll quickly build up a thought or a strategy or a rough prototype and showcase to our clients and our brands something that excites us. And that's not to say we aren't talking about AR and VR. We are thinking really hard about how to apply it towards our clients' biggest challenges. It's just from a technology standpoint, we want to make sure that it can actually reach a scale and be delivered at a layer that's responsible to our clients and partners.
So it sounds like you basically stay up to speed on the tech, but really wait for the market to be ready for, basically there be enough of it in the market for you to deploy it.
Yeah. I mean, we've done a lot of very controlled prototyping and proof of concept work, in the voice space and beyond, and really thinking about how that can apply at an enterprise level. And I think, again, for me, the most interesting aspect to all of this is the enterprise. It's how do you introduce things that will really make things like hospitality, retail, transportation and logistics. How do you make that entire world feel more branded and more focused on customer enjoyment? Because so often it hasn't been. I mean, I'm just thinking about it now, and it's like, whether you're a restaurant or a hotel, how do you start the journey at home in a way that feels really seamless? So when you get into the restaurant, it's almost just like an extension versus you don't know what you're getting when you walked in. For transportation and logistics, I think it's a huge space that technology could really make a massive impact. And whether that's tracking shipments and sending real-time updates to customers and being able to capture all that data, which is super interesting. But imagine being able to layer kind of a brand and a personality on top of that. And it's not just like your mattress will be here in 15 minutes, your shipment is going to be 2 days late. It's an entire branded layer on top of that introduces areas of the customer journey that simply didn't exist 2 years ago or 5 years ago, and being able to really brand that and make it feel personalized. So that is what really, really excites me. And I think we're close. I think enterprise, Internet of Things stuff is getting more and more out there. But until there is, security and scale completely figured out and buttoned up, a lot of brands are going to be hesitant to really jump in full-fledged. But we are tracking it like hawks and just looking for our opportunities to develop great ideas and, figuring out where it is to take that risk and then encourage our brands and partners to go at it.
And lastly, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence?
I mean, that's
in terms of where it stands right now.
We're doing a lot of artificial intelligence work across the API sets from the big companies. So whether that's Facebook, Google, IBM, and Amazon and whatnot. But it's only becoming more and more relevant weekly and monthly. But again, we're thinking about the non-sexy versions of artificial intelligence. Can we use artificial intelligence to make merchandising on our e-commerce sites smarter and more informed? Can we use it to make the publishers we work with, can we get them to have better content served up so there's more time on site and more articles read? Can we use it to inform SEO and make it smarter and figure out which terms make the most sense to start building up our SEO? So it's the things that aren't in the customer's face that I think is super interesting right now from an artificial intelligence standpoint. It's not something that is flashy where you're like, as a customer, oh, wow, this is artificial intelligence. This is really interesting. Wow, I'm interfacing with the future. Again, it's that forgettable aspect. It's the things that you don't necessarily know that's going on that is impacting you and making your life easier and better. I mean, I look at something so simple like the Gmail app, how it recommends now a few baked and canned responses, and it slowly gets smarter as you interact with it more. As someone that's constantly on the go, being able to just say like, looks good, send away without having to type it out is nice. And while it's not the most futuristic version of artificial intelligence, it's a start. And I think that if brands start thinking about it as, well, it's not the biggest thing in the world, but it's a start, they will move faster and they will ultimately have experience and wins and losses under their belt. So when things do get to the point of enterprise scale, they will have a whole breadth of knowledge that they'll be able to apply to something that'll make their company a whole lot more money or gain new customers. And I think it's incremental progress and incremental experimentation that really is where brands should focus their attention right now.
Thank you, John Sampogna, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.
Thank you so much. Hope this was helpful.